The private dining suite on the 62nd floor was lit like a courtroom built for ghosts. Cold, exact, every reflection sharpened by the city lights below. At the center of the long, obsidian table sat Sheikh Karim al-Masri, pen already uncapped. Hovering over a contract worth $240 million, his entourage filled the room with low murmurs, a clipped Gulf dialect that moved like static. She wasn't supposed to be inside this negotiation. She was only delivering tea. Lena had learned long ago how to make herself disappear. Quiet steps, lowered gaze, hands steady even when her pulse wasn't. The restaurant manager insisted she enter through the side door so the important people wouldn't notice her. Yet as she approached the table, tray balanced perfectly, the sheikh glanced at her with mild irritation, as if a shadow had brushed against his sleeve. He said something dismissive to her in his dialect, sharp, condescending, a tone that assumed incompetence. She froze, not because of the insult, but because he had mispronounced a single verb, flattening a consonant that changed the meaning entirely. She answered softly, in flawless, classical Arabic, not a correction, just a polite response built on perfect grammar. The room went still. 3 advisors looked up. One of the lawyers straightened his jacket. Even the sheikh blinked, taken slightly off guard by the precision of a voice that should have belonged to someone seated at the table, not carrying porcelain cups. But Lena didn't linger. She placed the tray, bowed her head, and turned toward the door. As she walked away, a single truth flickered through the tension. People only notice silence when it suddenly speaks. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. Lena had returned to the service corridor, breath held tight beneath her ribs. The metal walls, usually a refuge, felt too narrow now. She leaned against the utility shelf, letting the echo of the sheikh's surprise pass through her like a delayed tremor. She had spoken without thinking. Classical Arabic, instinctive, the language she had once studied with reverence before her academic life collapsed into debt and necessity. She shouldn't have answered him, not in that register, not in front of people who controlled fortunes, but it was done, and the room had noticed. Her manager appeared, whispering in that frantic tone reserved for emergencies and VIPs. "They want you back inside. Immediately. Don't speak unless spoken to. Understood?" He straightened her collar as if that could hide the fact she was wearing an apron instead of a tailored suit. Then he pushed the door open before she could object. The suite had shifted. She felt it as soon as she stepped in. One of the investors watched her with open curiosity. The corporate lawyer, silver hair, rigid posture, rested a finger on a document stack as though weighing her presence against some unseen risk. Sheikh Karim remained seated, but his gaze was now fixed on her with a new kind of scrutiny. Not admiration, not hostility, evaluation. "Stay," he said, gesturing to a corner of the room without looking at her again. The clipped Gulf dialect was still there, but the tone had changed. He was used to obedience, not being surprised. Lena obeyed, folding herself back into invisibility, though her pulse made her fingertips tremble. She watched the holographic projector activate, casting an amber light across the table as the lead consultant began explaining the deal. A historic acquisition of rare manuscripts, allegedly compiled before the 10th century, sealed in a binding that had never been questioned by any authority. The consultant's voice had the smoothness of someone accustomed to selling certainty, yet every so often he glanced toward Lena, as though her brief intervention had introduced an unexpected variable into the performance. She tried not to meet his gaze. She tried not to exist. Still, she felt something unsettling in the air, something just beneath the consultant's confident cadence. Not a mistake, not yet, but a pressure, like a hairline fracture in glass waiting for the right moment to split. And in that faint disturbance she remembered a simple truth. Sometimes the smallest interruption is enough to expose a fault line. Lena kept her hands clasped behind her apron, hiding the small tremor that always appeared when too many powerful men occupied one room. The suite's air felt engineered, temperature perfect, scent neutral, silence curated. Everything here existed to serve the confidence of those seated at the table. She didn't belong in spaces like this. That had been proven repeatedly. 3 years earlier, she had been a doctoral candidate in philology, specializing in pre-modern Arabic syntax and the linguistic evolution of honorific forms. She lived then in libraries, gloves on her hands, vellum under soft light, words older than empires guiding her breathing. Then her mother fell sick. Then the scholarships vanished. Then the hospital bills arrived faster than her applications for emergency funding could be processed. So she withdrew, stepped into the service industry, stopped mentioning her academic past. People didn't hire waitresses who spoke classical Arabic better than their clients. Invisibility became survival. She kept her head lowered now, eyes on the floor tiles that mirrored the chandelier like fractured constellations. The consultants continued their pitch to the sheikh, praising the manuscripts, their alleged provenance, the unbroken chain of custody, a phrase Lena had once adored, back when she believed language could still anchor truth. Her mind drifted to the numbers she carried like a quiet sickness. $38,600 in debt. 12 missed payments on her student loans. A landlord who sent her polite threats every week. And yet here she was, standing 5 feet away from people discussing sums large enough to erase entire countries' deficits. She told herself not to feel anything, not curiosity, not resentment, not hope. But curiosity had always been her downfall. She watched the consultant slide forward a leather-bound case, opening it with ceremonial slowness. The binding inside gleamed under the lights, too perfect, too deliberate, and something in Lena's chest tightened with an old, forgotten ache. She knew that sensation. It was the same one she had felt as a student when a manuscript's dating was off. Not wrong, just off, like a sentence spoken in a dialect the speaker didn't truly understand. She tried to tear her eyes away. She tried not to care, but that was the lie she told herself most often. Pretending you don't see something doesn't make you blind. Lena shifted her weight, counting her breaths. She had delivered the tea. Her job should have been finished. Normally, she would slip back to the kitchen, return to the rhythm of dishes and steam, and let the world of billion-dollar deals continue without her. But the sheikh had told her to stay, and no one disobeyed him in a room like this. The lead consultant, a tall man with a voice polished by years of controlling narratives, adjusted the projector's angle. A translucent image of the manuscript filled the space above the table, floating like a relic under examination. He spoke about pigment stability, parchment aging curves, and ink stratification, each term delivered with performative confidence. Lena recognized every word. She had studied them once, obsessively. But something in his cadence bothered her. He was reciting facts without intimacy, knowledge without touch. Her eyes drifted to the binding in the display case. Fragile threads, darkened edges, the faint waviness of parchment that had supposedly survived 11 centuries without restoration. Something about the waviness was wrong. Natural aging produced irregular ripples. These ripples were symmetrical. She blinked and forced herself to look away. It wasn't her problem. These weren't her clients. And the last time she had noticed something in a museum internship, she had been politely dismissed for overstepping, then quietly removed from the rotation. The consultant clicked to the next slide. A certificate of provenance appeared, embossed and signed by 3 European scholars. At the bottom right corner was a seal, supposedly original to a monastic library. Lena's stomach tightened. The seal's iconography belonged to a region where this script had never circulated. She bit the inside of her cheek. She was imagining things. She had to be imagining things. The lawyer beside the sheikh, an older man with sunken eyes, began summarizing the contract clauses. His tone flat, efficient, unbothered. The acquisition is final, non-reversible. Custodial responsibility transfers upon signature, regardless of subsequent disputes regarding authenticity. Lena felt her heart skip. That clause meant one thing. If the manuscript was fake, even slightly, the sheikh would still lose the full $240 million. She looked up, unthinking, and one of the advisors caught her expression. His gaze narrowed, suspicious, as if he had discovered an intruder reading a map she wasn't entitled to understand. She lowered her eyes again, but the pressure kept building, something unseen tightening around her ribs, compelling her to speak, to leave, to hide. She wasn't sure which. She whispered to herself, barely audible. When a room refuses to release you, it's because it knows you've seen too much. The consultant dimmed the lights further, plunging the suite into a focused half-darkness. Only the projection remained bright, amber, immaculate, authoritative. It cast its glow across the faces of the men at the table, sculpting them into confident silhouettes. Power looked cleaner in this kind of lighting, Lena thought. It made arrogance appear like certainty. The consultant clasped his hands behind his back. "Gentlemen, this manuscript is a masterpiece without precedent." Lena stayed in the shadowed corner assigned to her, though the attention in the room kept drifting toward her like an accidental spotlight. The investors murmured in agreement, nodding as though they had just witnessed proof of divinity. No one questioned anything. No one even blinked when the consultant described the binding as structurally untouched by time, a phrase Lena knew was physically impossible. Then the experts were introduced. 2 men flown in from Europe and 1 from a Gulf foundation. Their credentials were impressive, their voices steady. They praised the ink composition, the vellum's elasticity, the unbroken quire structure, every detail perfect, every measurement within ideal margins. Lena's breath hitched at that word, ideal. Old manuscripts were never ideal. Human hands didn't produce perfection. Centuries didn't preserve it. Perfection was a mask. One of the experts gestured toward the displayed folios. Observe the proportional stability across all pages. No warping, no irregular shrinkage. Remarkable, truly. But Lena had seen something different, a subtle uniformity, too consistent for genuine aging. The kind produced not by time, but by controlled environments and artificial distressing. She forced her gaze away, knowing she had no right to see what she saw. The sheikh leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the contract folder. His posture relaxed, too relaxed. She recognized the look, a man already convinced, already stepping into ownership of something that felt destined for him. Another expert praised the provenance document, calling it beyond dispute. Another nodded and said, "Flawless authentication trail." Another declared, "No anomalies whatsoever." Lena's throat tightened. No anomalies. That was the first sign of danger. Authenticity lived in irregularities, not in the absence of them. She pressed a hand against her apron pocket, grounding herself against the rising urge to speak. It wasn't her place. She wasn't a scholar anymore. She couldn't afford to lose another job, not when she owed nearly $800 in rent by the end of the week. Still, her eyes drifted back to the seal on the provenance sheet. A tiny curl in the ornamental border. Too precise, too modern. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself into stillness. Let them talk. Let them praise. Let them drown her doubts beneath layers of authority. But the first shiver of certainty had already taken hold inside her, unstoppable as a fracture traveling through stone. Even the most convincing truth becomes suspicious when repeated too perfectly. The presentation deepened, folding the room into a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Each expert spoke with the confidence of a man accustomed to being believed. Each slide added another layer of certainty, another cushion beneath the sheik's decision to sign. It was the choreography of persuasion, smooth, elegant, and meticulously timed. Lena stood motionless, but inside, something had begun to split. The consultant switched the projection to a close-up of the manuscript's colophon, the final inscription used to date and attribute a work. Gold flecks glittered across the image, arranged in a pattern meant to convey ancient reverence. The investors leaned forward, impressed. The sheik's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. But Lena saw the tiniest inconsistency, the spacing between two characters, subtly influenced by a modern calligraphic habit she recognized from contemporary workshops. A scribe in the 10th century would not have used that spacing. A student in 2025 very easily could. She inhaled carefully. She swallowed the urge to speak. The lawyer, seated closest to the sheik, cleared his throat and tapped the contract again. Your Highness, the final audit occurs after signature. Under Clause 7.3, the burden of authenticity falls on the custodial party upon transfer. This protects the consortium against any potential claims. Lena felt those words like a physical blow. Plain language translation. If the document was fake, the sheik would be forced to prove it, and he would lose even if he won. She looked briefly toward him. He wasn't a cruel man. She could see that now. His wealth gave him command, but his expression betrayed something more human. Loneliness wrapped in entitlement, fatigue hidden beneath prestige. He trusted his advisors. He trusted the experts. He trusted the idea of acquiring a piece of history that would immortalize his family name. He had no idea he was stepping into a trap. One of the experts began recounting the manuscript's journey. A monastery, a private collection, an estate sale. The story was elegant, cinematic, plausibly tragic. But the transitions were too smooth. No gaps, no uncertainties, no contradictory testimonies. Real provenance always contained shadows. This one was antiseptic. Lena felt heat rising under her collar. Her breathing grew uneven. She clenched her hands behind her back so no one would see. Then the consultant gestured toward the contract folder, its leather pristine under the chandelier's cold light. We recommend proceeding tonight, he said. Holding this manuscript for another party would be impossible. There is a museum in Doha, already expressing interest. Scarcity pressure. Classic tactic. The sheik nodded slowly. He was nearly convinced. The pen on the table gleamed like a trigger. Lena's body thrummed with warning. She didn't know whether to step back or forward, whether silence was loyalty or violence in a moment like this. Because there are moments when staying quiet feels like complicity. The chandelier's light shifted as the projector dimmed, leaving the suite in a twilight glow that made every surface look impossibly expensive. The contract folder sat at the center of the table like an altar, the pen placed diagonally across it with ceremonial intent. The sheik's advisors leaned forward, their silhouettes poised, eager but controlled, men trained to appear calm even when millions hung in the balance. Lena stood completely still, though the room felt as if it were slowly tilting toward disaster. The consultant clasped his hands, bowing his head slightly. Your Highness, he said, with a reverence too rehearsed to be sincere, you may sign whenever you are ready. The air tightened. The sheik reached for the pen. Lena's breath hitched. His fingers brushed the metal. A soft metallic click echoed through the suite as he lifted it. She felt the moment in her bones. She had known this tension once, during exams where every second mattered. She had felt it again, during her mother's final months, when each decision, medical, financial, carried quiet catastrophe. The body remembers danger before the mind does. The lawyer beside him opened the contract to the signature page, laying it flat. The consortium agrees to transfer custody within 72 hours of signature. His tone was neutral, untroubled. Lena noticed it then. His eyes never left the Sheikh's hand. He didn't glance at the manuscript. He didn't look at the projections. He only stared at the signing motion. That was the behavior of someone who already knew the truth. Her pulse accelerated. The experts murmured approvingly, leaning in. The investors exchanged subtle, satisfied smiles. They appeared to believe that the Sheikh was seconds away from immortalizing his legacy with a flawless acquisition. But Lena saw something different. On the projection, the seal on the provenance sheet appeared again. Enlarged, clarified. And now, with the image brightened slightly, she noticed an inconsistency she had missed before. A faint halo where the seal met the parchment. A glow invisible to the untrained eye. Artificial adhesion. Laser heat transfer. A modern printing signature. Her throat closed. Her fingertips tingled. The room felt like it was narrowing to a single vanishing point. The tip of the pen. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, shallow and slow. She tried to look away. She tried to disappear again into the corner where she belonged, but she couldn't. Not anymore. The Sheikh lowered the pen toward the page. Lena's heart hammered once, twice, a third time, each beat landing like a silent verdict. And in that suspended breath between intention and consequence, she understood something impossible to ignore. There are moments when truth demands a witness, even from the invisible. The pen's tip hovered over the signature line, a single bead of ink trembling at the edge. The room had entered that rare, reverent silence reserved for irreversible decisions. Even the city noise below felt muted. Every advisor leaned forward, as if proximity alone could will the Sheikh into signing. And then, a flicker on the projection. Barely perceptible, a micro glitch, but enough. Lena's eyes snapped to it instinctively. She knew projection distortions. This wasn't one. This was ink reflecting light from an angle that genuine iron gall ink simply didn't produce. A gleam too symmetrical, too deliberate. She took a small step forward before forcing herself still. The consultant noticed the flicker too, but when he glanced toward the screen, he dismissed it with practiced ease, smoothing the lapels of his suit. "Just a calibration shift," he murmured to the room. Lena's breath shortened. No, that wasn't calibration. Genuine ancient ink absorbed light. This reflected it, like pressure-applied pigment. Her gaze dropped to the physical manuscript inside the display case. The binding looked ancient at a distance, but up close, a faint indentation at the inner spine caught her attention. A modern thermal press left marks like that when bonding new materials to old fragments. Her chest tightened, and then she saw the smallest detail, the one that changed everything. The colophon's golden flecks. They were identical across 3 consecutive pages. Not similar, identical. As in cloned. As in printed. No medieval scribe would replicate decorative imperfections with machine-level precision. No centuries-old manuscript survived with perfect flake retention. The probability was beyond zero. Her hands grew cold. The Sheikh wasn't about to make a poor purchase. He was about to walk into a flawlessly constructed forgery, layered with just enough authenticity to deceive men who expected their expertise to be unchallenged. She whispered without meaning to, "No." One of the advisors turned sharply. "What was that?" His voice sliced through the quiet. Lena's lips parted. She hadn't spoken loudly. She hadn't meant to speak at all. But now 5 heads were turned toward her. The consultant's expression hardened. "Please," he said, each syllable steeped in irritation. The staff should remain silent. Lena stepped back, heat rising along her neck, panic rushing into her lungs. She shouldn't have reacted. She shouldn't have been seen. The sheikh lowered the pen slightly, but not by choice. His attention had shifted to her, curiosity edging into annoyance. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his clipped Gulf dialect sharp again. Lena swallowed hard, shaking her head. She couldn't speak. Not yet. Not with the evidence still forming its shape in her mind. The consultant moved quickly, reclaiming control. "Your Highness, there is no issue. We can proceed." The pen rose again. Lena's pulse hammered through her wrists, her throat, her spine. She could see the anomaly clearly now. The modern seal, the forged gilding, the thermal press signature. She was the only person in the room who could see the danger. And she understood the truth with blistering clarity. Silence, in moments like this, becomes a weapon pointed at the innocent. The pen touched the signature line. A single millimeter of movement, smooth, inevitable, began the contract's execution. Lena didn't remember deciding to move. Her body simply acted, propelled by a force older than fear and stronger than obedience. She stepped forward, one step, then another, her shoes silent on the marble. The advisors noticed first. Their heads snapped toward her, outrage rising like heat. The consultant stiffened, his jaw tightening in disbelief. The sheikh paused, the nib of the pen resting against paper. He looked up. Lena felt her pulse in her fingertips. Her voice was barely there when she spoke. "Your Highness..." "Wait." The words cut through the air like a blade. Gasps swelled around the table. The pen froze. The lawyer muttered something furious under his breath. The consultant's eyes widened, equal parts shock and fury. One advisor stepped forward as if to stop her, but the sheikh lifted a hand, halting him. "You," he said, staring at her with controlled irritation. "Explain yourself." The clipped dialect sharpened, edges cold as marble. But this time she didn't shrink. Her voice trembled, but her grammar did not. She switched, clean, precise, to classical Arabic, the register of scholars, courts, and history itself. "Something in the manuscript is not consistent with its claimed age," she said. "I beg you to delay your signature until it's re-examined." The suite fell into a silence so deep she could hear the hum of the ventilation. The consultant recovered first, stepping forward, his smile tight enough to crack. "Your Highness, this is inappropriate. She is a waitress. She is not qualified to speak on matters of provenance." Lena kept her gaze on the sheikh. She didn't dare look at the consultant. She didn't need his permission. The sheikh's eyes narrowed. "On what basis do you speak?" Lena inhaled, steadying her voice. Her hands were shaking so violently she clasped them behind her back. "I studied philology and manuscript authentication for 8 years. What you are purchasing contains elements that do not belong to the 10th century." One advisor scoffed loudly. "Ridiculous. The world's finest experts authenticated it." But her courage, fragile, borrowed, trembling, did not break. She pointed subtly to the projection where the provenance seal remained enlarged. "If you allow me 5 minutes, I can show you the first problem." The consultant snapped. "This is absurd. Remove her." 2 security personnel at the door tensed, awaiting direction. But the sheikh did not look at them. He looked only at her. Something in her voice, its precision, its refusal to bend, its terrifying sincerity, had pierced through the ritual choreography of wealth and confidence. He lowered the pen fully this time. "You have 5 minutes," he said. The room erupted in whispers, outrage, disbelief. The consultant paled. The lawyer closed the contract with an irritated thump. Lena tried to breathe. Her knees threatened to buckle. She had crossed a threshold she could never uncross. And she confronted the moment with the quiet truth she could no longer deny. Sometimes the only way to stop a disaster is to become visible. The room rearranged itself without anyone moving. The contract was closed, the pen lay silent, and every gaze in the suite, furious, skeptical, calculating, locked onto her. Lena stepped closer to the table, though her legs felt carved from the trembling glass. The chandelier's reflection wavered across the obsidian surface, bending with her breathing. She tried to steady herself, but adrenaline had turned her pulse into a drumbeat. The consultant stood rigid, arms crossed over his chest. "You have 5 minutes," he said coldly. "Use them wisely." She nodded once, then pointed to the projection. "Your Highness," she said in classical Arabic, "please enlarge the seal again." The investor controlling the tablet hesitated, glancing at the consultant for permission. The sheikh raised a hand before anyone could object. "Show her," he said. The image magnified, impossibly detailed, crisp, almost proud of its deception. Lena drew a breath. First anomaly. The halo around the seal. The consultant exhaled impatiently. A completely normal result of vellum aging. "No," she replied quietly. "Genuine parchment absorbs ink into its fibers. It never leaves a reflective margin. That glow indicates heat transfer, an adhesion technique developed in the last decade." A beat, then another. The sheikh leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "So you're saying the seal was added recently?" "In plain terms," Lena said, "someone printed it onto the page." The eruption began instantly. "That's absurd. Impossible. She is untrained. She is making assumptions." Lena didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the display case, voice low but unwavering. "Second anomaly, the gold flecks in the colophon." The screen shifted to the decorative inscription. The golden dust shimmered evenly across the image. These flecks repeat in identical pattern on 3 consecutive pages. Natural gold flake never replicates itself exactly. But a digital stencil does. She paused, letting the weight of the sentence settle. This is cloning, not craftsmanship. One of the experts stiffened. "That is a serious accusation." "Yes," she said, "because it is true." The consultant's composure cracked for the first time. "This is dangerous speculation." Lena raised her hand subtly, not to silence him, but to continue. Third anomaly, the spine. She pointed to the binding inside the case. There is a micro-indentation at the inner seam. That mark is produced by a modern thermal binder, used to fuse new sections to old fragments without altering the outer stitching. The sheikh's expression changed, slowly, deliberately. From irritation to concentration to something colder, suspicion. The consultant stepped forward, voice sharp. "This is reckless. She does not understand this level of authentication." Lena continued, her tone no longer timid but steady. "Your Highness, the anomalies do not prove incompetence, they prove intention. Someone built this manuscript from fragments, some real, most not, and stitched them together into something that could pass a superficial audit." She let the silence linger. "And they prepared a contract designed to make that forgery yours." The lawyer bristled. "Her claims have no legal grounding." Lena turned toward him, her voice quieter still. Clause 7.3 reverses the burden of proof, meaning if the manuscript is fake, His Highness must prove fraud after paying for it in full. Even if he succeeds, he still loses. The contract is engineered for that outcome. The lawyer's face drained of color. The consultant's jaw locked. One of the investors muttered a curse under his breath. The sheikh leaned back, staring at the manuscript as though seeing it for the first time. The room was suffocatingly silent. Lena's chest rose and fell with controlled breaths she barely felt. The tremor in her hands hadn't stopped. She hid them behind her back again. And in that heavy stillness, One truth hung in the air like smoke. Every masterpiece of deception depends on one thing, no one daring to look too closely. The suite felt colder now, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees the moment truth entered the room. The men at the table shifted uneasily, their polished certainty dissolving grain by grain. The manuscript, once revered, displayed like a treasure, now sat under suspicion, its authenticity stripped of the aura that had shielded it. But the contract remained, and that, Lena knew, was where the real danger lived. She stepped closer, sensing that if she showed hesitation now, the consultants would seize control again, burying her objections under layers of authority and indignation. Her voice emerged softer than she intended, but precise. "Your Highness, may I approach the document?" The sheikh gave a single nod. The lawyer hesitated, briefly, but slid the contract folder toward her, not without a trace of resentment. Lena opened it carefully, her fingers steadying as they touched paper she had no right to touch. She felt the weight of the room pressing into her spine. She moved to page 6, then page 12. Then to the hidden clause, buried in dense, technical language written in a legal dialect built to confuse even multilingual readers. "There," she said, pointing to a 4-line paragraph buried under disclaimers. The consultant stepped forward sharply. "This is standard indemnification language." "It's a trap," Lena replied. The lawyer stiffened. "Explain yourself." She exhaled, feeling every eye sharpen on her. The phrasing here, custodial liability, independent of subsequent forensic determination, means that once His Highness accepts physical possession, he becomes legally responsible for all flaws, whether intentional, historical, or engineered. She turned the page, tapping the next clause. And this line, disputes adjudicated by the consortium's internal arbitration board, removes his right to take the matter to an external court. He cannot sue, he cannot contest, he cannot appeal. If the manuscript is proven fake, he must still pay the full amount and accept all losses. The sheikh's eyes hardened. The truth was hitting him now. Quietly, deeply, irrevocably. But Lena wasn't done. She moved to the back section, one that looked like a harmless technical appendix. Her finger stopped on a sentence written in the smallest permissible legal font. "And this is the most dangerous part," she said. It states that any challenge to the manuscript's authenticity constitutes breach, meaning if you question it, even once, you automatically lose. The consultant exploded. "This is outrageous. She is misreading it deliberately." "No," Lena said, meeting his gaze for the first time. "I am reading it precisely. The clause is structured to appear technical, but the consequence is simple. The moment he doubts you, he forfeits the contract." A long, suffocating silence followed. The sheikh leaned forward, voice low. "So even if I had proof of fraud, you would still be liable," Lena said gently. "And they would own the legal process that determines your loss." The consultant's mask slipped entirely. "This is absurd." The sheikh raised a hand, silencing him with an elegance that carried centuries of inherited authority. Lena closed the contract, the weight of what she'd exposed settling into the room like dust after an implosion. She wasn't trembling anymore. Not because she was unafraid, but because truth had steadied her. And as she stepped back, she understood the quiet reality of moments like this. Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones written in perfect grammar. The room no longer felt like a negotiation suite. It felt like a crime scene, one where the weapon was still cooling on the table. The consultants had gone quiet, too quiet. Powerful men rarely stayed silent unless they were recalculating. The sheikh closed the contract folder with deliberate precision, his fingertips pressing into the leather as though testing its strength. His eyes had shifted from curiosity to something colder, more piercing, a gaze that demanded truth without mercy. "Who drafted this?" he asked. No one answered. The lawyer cleared his throat, but whatever justification he had prepared died before it reached his lips. The investors exchanged tense glances, realizing how deeply this disaster could stain them. Even the experts, confident moments ago, now looked uncertain, as though each feared being asked to speak next. Lena stood still, palms damp, her breath shaky but controlled. She had expected resistance, disbelief, maybe even removal. She had not expected the room to fracture so quickly. The Sheikh's voice came again, measured and precise. "You," his gaze locked on the lead consultant. "Explain the clause." The consultant straightened, tugging at his cuffs. His smile was thin, a mask no longer fitting the shape of his face. "Your Highness, such clauses are standard in major acquisitions where risk—" "Stop!" The word cut cleanly through the air. The consultant swallowed. "Standard, where risk to you is eliminated," the Sheikh continued. "Not to me." The room tightened around the truth. One of the European experts rose slightly from his chair, palms out in attempted calm. "Your Highness, allow us to re-verify the manuscript. We can run additional spectrographic—" "No," the Sheikh said. "The anomalies she identified are obvious. They were visible to an unarmed eye, and none of you saw them." The sting of that sentence sent a ripple through the room. The consultant stepped forward again, desperation pushing cracks into his polished demeanor. "Your Highness, she is a waitress. You are taking the word of a—" The Sheikh cut him off, voice low but lethal. "I am taking the word of the only person in this room who's not being paid to deceive me." A hush swept the suite. Lena felt the words hit her like an unexpected wind, both terrifying and protective. She had never been defended by a man with this much power. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't prepared for. The Sheikh turned toward her now, fully, without irritation or dismissal. "If what you say is true, if this was constructed from fragments, how much of the manuscript is authentic?" Lena hesitated. She knew the answer, but saying it aloud would end whatever fragile alliances existed in the room. "Maybe 10%, she said quietly, "and those pages were likely chosen to mask the forgery." The lawyer slammed his palm against the table. "This is slander." "It is fact," Lena replied, her voice steady despite the tremor rising in her chest. "And if you test the gold in the colophon, you'll find its purity level corresponds to modern extraction methods, not medieval ones." The Sheikh nodded slowly. The scheme was collapsing, quietly, elegantly, irreversibly. A silence settled over the suite, heavy and electric, the kind that revealed character. The consultant's mask finally cracked. "Your Highness, we can renegotiate." "There will be no negotiation," the Sheikh said. "Not today, not ever." And in that stillness, Lena realized something simple and profound. The truth doesn't always need force. Sometimes it only needs a voice brave enough to speak it aloud. The suite's atmosphere shifted from tense to radioactive. Truth had entered, and there was no undoing its damage. The consultants, moments ago, confident, polished, untouchable, now looked cornered. Their suits still immaculate, their cufflinks still gleaming, but the composure beneath them had begun to fray. Crisis has a way of stripping people down to their motives. The Sheikh leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, studying each man at the table as if re-evaluating an entire constellation of trust. His silence was more dangerous than any outburst. "Tell me," he said finally, "who benefits most from this acquisition?" The lead consultant hesitated. A fatal mistake. Lena stepped forward gently, not to compete with their voices, but because the truth was already forming on her tongue. "The consortium." She kept her tone calm, factual. They collect the payment. They offload a forged manuscript. They control the arbitration process. And they shift the risk entirely onto you. The investors shifted uncomfortably. The lawyer stiffened. But no one contradicted her. The sheikh turned to the experts, his expression unreadable. "Did you examine the manuscript yourselves?" The oldest expert answered first, voice trembling. "We were shown selected folios. We were informed the rest were too fragile to handle." Lena closed her eyes briefly. A controlled preview, classic strategy in high-value fraud. The sheikh's gaze moved to the next expert. "And you?" "I reviewed the provenance documents," the man stammered. "They appeared legitimate." "Appeared," the sheikh repeated softly. "A word used by cowards." No one spoke. The room was suffocating on its own silence. The consultant tried one last pivot, his voice suddenly gentle, conciliatory. "Your Highness, we may have been misled by our suppliers. Let us run a full audit. We can clarify everything." Lena felt every muscle in her body tense. She could see the trap forming again, stalling, redirecting, shifting blame until the truth lost clarity. "No," she said quietly. "An audit supervised by the consortium only deepens their control. They need time to reframe the narrative, to erase the inconsistencies, to discredit the anomalies already revealed." The consultant snapped, voice cracking. "You know nothing about high-level acquisitions." "I know the difference between transparency and performance," she said steady. "And everything you've done tonight is performance." The words hit like a blade wrapped in velvet. The sheikh's gaze returned to her, focused, unwavering, almost unnervingly still. "What would you recommend?" Lena felt her heartbeat turn into a low thrum in her ears. She had never been asked for her recommendation by anyone powerful. Not once. Not even in academia, where she'd worked twice as hard for half as much acknowledgement. She lifted her chin slightly. "Independent verification," she said, "by someone who does not answer to the consortium, the investors, or the experts hired tonight." The consultant stepped forward, desperate. "Your Highness, we cannot hand a delicate manuscript to an outsider. It risks damage." Lena cut him gently. "You're worried someone might find the repairs." The room inhaled sharply. The sheikh stood, slow, controlled, deliberate, power measured in posture. "Enough," he said. The word was not loud, but it ended the performance entirely. The consultant lowered his head. The experts froze. Even the lawyer's breath faltered. Lena remained where she was, her heart pounding so violently she feared the room might hear it. The sheikh took a step toward the display case. "Bring me the manuscript." The consultant lunged forward. "Your Highness, I strongly advise." "You advise nothing," the sheikh said. "Not anymore." The manuscript was brought to him, carefully, reverently, as though it still held its illusion of value. He examined the spine, the gilding, the seal, the symmetry. And then he looked at Lena, softly, dangerously, as if recognizing something in her he'd missed until now. "You were right," he said. The suite exhaled, and Lena understood something she had never allowed herself to believe. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the only one not afraid of the truth. The moment the sheikh declared, "You were right," the room's hierarchy shattered. What had been a controlled performance turned abruptly into a scramble for survival. The investors leaned back, distancing themselves from the consultants with the subtle instinct of men who understood reputational fire. The experts avoided eye contact entirely, retreating into the shadows of their own credentials. And the lead consultant, once the commanding presence in the suite, now looked like a man trying to outrun the truth trapped in his own briefcase. The sheikh closed the display case with a soft click, a quiet gesture but final. He motioned to his security detail. Seal the manuscript. No one touches it. The consultants' faces blanched. One took a step forward, voice trembling beneath an attempt at composure. Your Highness, this could be misunderstood. If we simply review the provenance— You will not review anything, the Sheikh said. You will answer. The advisor closest to him, previously smug, now swallowed hard. Your Highness, perhaps we should handle this privately. There is nothing private about a $240 million deception. His tone was calm, but the restraint in it was far more dangerous than rage. Lena stood in silence, watching the architecture of authority in the room crumble. She had wanted to disappear all her life, but not now. She remained steady, even as her hands trembled behind her back. The Sheikh circled the table slowly, his footsteps echoing off glass and marble. When were you planning to inform me, he asked the consultant, that authenticity could not be independently verified? The consultant's mouth worked before sound arrived. We believe the manuscript genuine. No, Lena said softly. Her voice startled even her. The Sheikh turned toward her, granting her space to continue. She nodded once, breath trembling but words controlled. They believe the story genuine. They never examined the object. Ugh! The consultant exploded, losing the last of his composure. This is nonsense! She is overstepping. She is a waitress. Who prevented my loss? The Sheikh said. Every syllable carried the weight of a verdict. The consultant's face drained of color. The lawyer tried to intervene, sliding forward in an attempt to reclaim narrative. Your Highness, legally speaking, no transaction occurred. We can dissolve the arrangement without confrontation. The matter can be settled. Settled? The Sheikh repeated, voice dangerously soft. When a forged manuscript was presented to me as genuine, when an irreversible contract was prepared to strip me of legal recourse, when experts I trusted certified a fabrication. No one answered. The silence was not passive. It was suffocating. The Sheikh approached the consultant directly now. The two men stood only a breath apart. You would have had me sign tonight, he said quietly. You would have applauded. You would have congratulated yourselves. The consultant lowered his head. And when the truth emerged later, the Sheikh continued, you would have blamed the fragment, the history, the ambiguity, anything but the design of the scheme. Still, no reply. He stepped back, dismissing the man with a subtle tilt of his head. Leave. The consultant hesitated, long enough to suggest he believed he still had leverage. One of the security officers stepped forward, and the hesitation vanished. He gathered his papers with shaking hands, his authority evaporating with every movement. As he walked out, the suite felt lighter, not relieved, not resolved, but cleared of its most persistent lie. The Sheikh turned to the remaining experts. You may go as well. They obeyed instantly, eyes avoiding Lena's as if acknowledging her would confirm their own failure. When the door closed, the suite felt larger, quieter, more honest. The Sheikh exhaled once, slowly, then looked at Lena with something between recognition and regret. You changed the outcome of this entire night, he said. She lowered her gaze, but her voice remained steady. I only spoke because no one else would. The Sheikh nodded, thoughtful. And as the last remnants of the scheme dissolved around them, Lena understood the truth threading through the silence. Sometimes a collapse isn't destruction. Sometimes it's the first breath of something real. The suite felt cavernous now that the noise of deception had left it. Only the Sheikh, his closest advisor, two security officers, and Lena remained. The manuscript sat sealed on the table, suddenly small, almost pitiful, stripped of its myth. The Sheikh's posture shifted, no longer tense, no longer bracing for humiliation. He looked contemplative. A man reconstructing the shape of the world after a near catastrophe. He turned toward his advisor. "Contact the consortium. Inform them the acquisition is terminated." The advisor nodded, visibly relieved to have an order he could follow. "And inform them," the sheikh added, "that a forensic review of all prior dealings with my office will begin immediately." The advisor hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but then hurried out. The sheikh's gaze returned to Lena. She expected anger. She expected condescension. She expected some elegant dismissal that returned her to invisibility. Instead, he approached her slowly, carefully, as though stepping toward a rare artifact he had failed to notice. "You saw what none of us did," he said. Lena's throat tightened. "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone." "You didn't," he replied. "You saved me." She shook her head. "I don't know if I saved anything. I just recognized patterns." He studied her, truly studied her, in a way that made her shift her weight. Unsure what to do with the sudden attention, his expression carried something quieter than admiration and deeper than gratitude. Guilt. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. 7 months. "And before that?" She hesitated. The truth always felt like a confession. "Graduate work, manuscript studies, classical philology. I couldn't finish." He nodded once, slowly. The respect in that gesture hit her harder than any insult she'd ever heard. One of the security officers stepped forward with the consultant's abandoned briefcase. "Your Highness, what would you like done with this?" The sheikh didn't look at it. "Document everything and send copies to my legal team." His gaze sharpened. "There will be accountability." Lena felt a tremor of fear, then realized it wasn't hers. It belonged to the men who had left the room moments earlier. The sheikh walked back to the table, placing both hands on its edge. "If you had not spoken..." He let the sentence trail off, but its truth hovered between them. She finished it for him, quietly. "You would have signed." He exhaled, not with anger, this time with something closer to humility. "You risked your job," he said. "Why?" Lena swallowed, unsure whether her voice would hold. "Because I know what it feels like to lose something you can't recover." The sheikh's expression softened, not pity, not superiority, just understanding. A rare human moment in a room built for power. He nodded, almost to himself. "I owe you more than gratitude tonight." Lena stepped back, heart unsettled. "You owe me nothing, Your Highness." He held her gaze, longer than anyone had ever held it without dismissing her. "Everyone owes something to the person who saves them," he said softly. Her breath caught, and in that delicate, dangerous stillness, she learned a truth she had never been allowed to believe. Being seen is its own form of power, especially when you've spent years learning to disappear. The suite had quieted into a strange calm, like the final minutes after a storm, when the air still trembles with what almost happened. The manuscript was sealed, the conspirators dispersed, and Lena, who had entered this room carrying a tray, stood now at the center of a decision she had never imagined for herself. The sheikh paced slowly near the window, the city lights flickering across his expression. He wasn't angry, he wasn't triumphant. He seemed reflective, as though recalibrating the architecture of his trust. Lena stayed near the corner, uncertain whether she should leave or remain. Every instinct told her to retreat, to return to the comfort of anonymity before the world realized she had dared to step outside it. But the sheikh turned toward her. "You said you recognized patterns," he began, "that you knew what forgery looks like, not only materially, but structurally." Her pulse tightened. "Yes, Your Highness." "And you saw all of this," he gestured to the sealed manuscript, "in minutes." "I wasn't judging the whole object," she said quickly. "Only the inconsistencies they overlooked." Anyone trained in manuscript dating would have— No, he interrupted gently. Not anyone. He stepped closer, not imposing, but attentive. Tell me something, he said. If you were still in your doctoral program, what would you have studied next? The question hit her like a blow she hadn't prepared for. She inhaled slowly. Comparative script evolution in early Islamic codices, and pre-modern forgery patterns across monastic libraries. A faint, incredulous smile touched the Sheikh's expression. So, exactly the skills that saved me tonight. She lowered her eyes. I didn't save anyone. I just noticed details. No, he said. You noticed truth. Silence settled between them, full, heavy, meaningful. One of the advisors re-entered quietly, hesitant. Your Highness, the consortium is requesting a statement. They insist the misunderstanding be resolved privately. Tell them nothing, the Sheikh replied, and informed legal counsel to prepare a formal inquiry. The advisor nodded and slipped out again. The Sheikh turned back to her. Lena, he said, her name pronounced carefully, without mockery or dialectal edge. Why are you working as a waitress? Her throat tightened. She could have lied. She could have offered something simple, something forgettable. But after what she had done tonight, dishonesty felt impossible. My mother was sick, she said. The hospitals drained everything. I lost my scholarship. I couldn't keep up with tuition or housing. I thought I'd return to my studies once things stabilized, but they never did. The Sheikh nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of each word. Do you wish to finish what you started? She blinked. It's not possible anymore. It is, he said. His voice held no doubt. None. She stared at him, stunned. He continued. I fund a private forensic institute, small, discreet, focused on linguistics, authentication, and document recovery. We review manuscripts, contracts, historical claims. We investigate truth where others see only paperwork. She didn't breathe. She couldn't. I want you on the team, he said simply. Her knees nearly weakened. Your Highness, I'm not qualified. You are, he said. You proved it tonight. With clarity, with courage, and with the kind of knowledge people cannot fake. She shook her head lightly, overwhelmed. But I don't have a degree. Not anymore. He stepped closer, still respectful, still steady. Degrees can be completed. Talent like yours cannot be taught. Her eyes burned, but she held back the ache in her chest. It was unreal, impossible, dangerous to hope for. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words formed. The Sheikh softened his tone. You won't have to hide in corners anymore. Her breath fractured, because she realized, with terrifying clarity, that he wasn't offering charity. He was offering recognition. And as the enormity of the moment pressed into her ribs, she understood something simple, quiet, undeniable. Sometimes the door you never expected to open is the one that was waiting for you all along. The archive room smelled of cedar boxes, vellum dust, and quiet ambition. Soft museum-grade lighting fell across rows of manuscripts, some genuine, some awaiting judgment, and between them moved a woman who no longer walked with the small, shadowed steps of someone trying to survive invisibility. Lena adjusted a pair of cotton gloves and lifted a folio under the glass lamp. No apron, no trembling hands, no one rushing her from behind. A badge rested on her lanyard. Senior Linguistic Analyst, Al-Mazri Forensic Institute. She had been here 11 months. She had completed the last courses of her interrupted degree, fully funded. She had begun a specialization in pre-modern forgery detection. Her debt was gone. Her rent was paid on time. Every time. And her voice, once something she fought to contain, had become her most reliable instrument. The institute wasn't large, just a few rooms, half a dozen full-time analysts, and a rotating circle of visiting scholars. But it was meticulous, respectful, and built for people who lived in the details. People like her. On her desk, a new assignment awaited. A disputed endowment letter from the 14th century. Nothing extraordinary, nothing world-ending. Just another case requiring her eyes, her calm, precise examinations, her gift for seeing the fracture where others saw the surface. A soft knock sounded at the door. Sheikh Karim stepped inside, not as the imposing figure from a year ago, but as the quiet, thoughtful patron who visited occasionally to check on the work he funded. No entourage. No clipped dialect. Just warmth wrapped in reserve. "How fares the script?" he asked, nodding toward the folio. "Ambiguous," Lena said, "but it will speak eventually." He smiled. "Manuscripts always do. With you." She looked down, hiding the faint heat that rose under her skin, but she no longer fled from recognition. He walked with her to the work table, studying the parchment beside her. In the silence that followed, a different tension existed. Gentler, unspoken, built on gratitude, neither fully articulated. "You changed the institute," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You just gave me a place where I didn't have to disappear." The sheikh nodded, his expression softening. "We only saw your voice because one night you refused to stay silent." Lena touched the folio lightly, feeling the grain beneath her gloves, the centuries held in its fibers, and she understood, with a steadiness that felt earned rather than borrowed. Sometimes survival becomes purpose the moment someone trusts you to speak. Night settled over the city, turning the institute's tall windows into mirrors. Lena stood in the reflection, no longer the woman who slipped between tables, no longer the shadow who apologized for knowing too much. She adjusted the reading lamp, closed the folio, and let the soft click echo through the quiet. This room had saved her, not because it held manuscripts worth fortunes, but because it held space for her voice. Outside, she could see the lights of the tower where everything had begun. A single shift, a single correction, a single moment when she stopped pretending she was invisible. She breathed in, steady and sure. Her life no longer hinged on silence, and as she turned off the lamp and left the archive for the night, one truth followed her into the hallway. Sometimes the smallest interruption becomes the story that was waiting for you all along. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories.